out of the red corner, an undefeated mixed martial artist holding a perfect professional record.
What's going on, guys? This Saturday, August 17th, is UFC 305, Duplessis versus Adesanya. You see the title, guys. This is my top 3 fights from UFC 305. I'm going to give you 2 honorable mentions, and then I'm going to start on my top 3 list. Without further ado, let's get right into it. So, my number 2 honorable mention is Tai Tuivasa versus Jairzinho Rozenstruik. So it's a matchup of heavyweight strikers. You got Jairzinho Rozenstruik, who's the more technical striker. Tai Tuivasa is the brawler. And I really like this fight because both guys are power punchers who are looking to knock out their opponent in each fight. Tuivasa, like I said earlier, he's coming in to brawl every time out, and he's trying to drink a beer out of someone's shoe after the fight. Rozenstruik is a much more technical striker, but he's also looking to knock out his opponent as well. So this fight will definitely be explosive. If either one of these guys lands clean, the fight is a wrap. Tuivasa can take a lot of damage, but with that being said, he's taken a lot of damage in his last few fights. At some point, the chin's gonna start to deteriorate and just start to go. Just don't think he can keep taking all the damage that he's been taking. But what I can say about Tuivasa is that even when he's taking damage in his fights, he still comes forward. He never quits on himself. Like, he always feels like he has a chance because he knows if he lands that one punch, the fight can change in an instant. But the reason why this fight is my number 2 honorable mention is because neither guy's in the top of the heavyweight division. And, you know, like, if Tai Tuivasa takes another loss here, we don't really know what's going to happen with his career. I mean, he's been in the UFC before, then was out of the UFC, then was back in the UFC. So that's really my reason why it's my number 2 honorable mention. Moving up into my number 1 honorable mention, we have Mateusz Gamrot versus Dan Hooker. So I like this fight, guys, because it's the classic striker versus grappler matchup. Each guy is essentially a fish out of water in the other guy's element, I guess you could say. Hooker's the long technical striker that shows up for an absolute war each and every fight. This guy's been in some of the best fights ever in the UFC. You got the Dan Hooker Dustin Poirier fight. You got the Dan Hooker Jalen Turner fight. You got the Dan Hooker, what's the other commentator? Paul Felder fight. Like, all absolute wars, guys. Dan Hooker is just never in a boring fight. So you're always excited when you see Dan Hooker on the card. Mateusz Gamrot is just the relentless chain wrestling and grappling. Like, he hasn't submitted anyone since 2021 though. So yes, he uses his grappling, but it's more so for control, and he can be a wet blanket at times. So some of his fights can be a bit boring. And the reason why this is an honorable mention for me is because with Gamrot's wrestling threat, I think Dan Hooker's going to be a bit more tentative on the feet, especially after how the fight with Islam went, where he threw a kick maybe a minute into the fight. It got caught. Islam Makhachev takes him down, gets into side control, locks up and submits Dan Hooker without even really breaking a sweat into the fight. So I think after that experience with the grappler, that Dan Hooker is going to be much more cautious about being in there with a grappler, knowing that, you know, if I'm careless and just throw out a naked kick and it gets caught, now I'm on my back and I might get submitted. So I think that's going to affect it. And then, as I said earlier, Gamrot, sometimes he can wet blanket guys and just get them down and just lay on them, which none of us likes to see, let's be honest. He doesn't really use much ground and pound, and just like I said, like, he hasn't submitted anybody since 2021, and that's the reason why it's my number 1 honorable mention. Moving up to my number 3 fight, we have Kai Kara-France versus Steve. Now, I really like this fight because it's a top 10 matchup. This is essentially a title eliminator. Both guys are complete fighters and have skills everywhere. Both guys are strikers, but they go about it a little differently. Kai Kara-France sits down on his punches and he's looking to do a little bit more damage. Whereas Steve Erceg doesn't quite sit down on his punches as much. He's the bigger, longer guy, and he's just looking more so to touch you and just score. But sometimes he does sit down on the punch and he will like knock a guy out, like especially in the Matt Snell fight right before he fought Alexandre Pantoja. And the reason why this fight is number 3 is because the other 2 fights, in my opinion, that I have ranked ahead of it are just a bit more explosive. And me personally, I like to see explosive fights where guys are in there trying to knock each other's heads off, and that's just what I like, guys. So with that being said, let's move to the number 2 fight. We have Lee versus Carlos Prater. Now, both these guys are knockout artists, guys. Both these guys come to bang, and they're trying to get their opponent out of there. The Leech has power in both hands, and he's looking to put your lights out. That's just how he fights. Praetas, on the other hand, he has that classic Muay Thai style, the very tall stance, uses front kicks, leg kicks, knees, elbows, and has a very big straight left hand. He's also looking to do damage on each of his strikes. This fight could be a war because both guys are going to be right in front of each other. I don't see either guy really trying to use footwork and trying to get out of the way. I think both these guys are going to be right in front of each other and just going to see who can knock the other one out first and just inflict the most damage on the other guy. And the reason why this fight is number 2 for me is because it just doesn't have the same type of stakes on it that my number 1 fight has. That's really the reason why it's my number 2 fight. With that said, the number 1 fight, of course, is the main event between Dricus du Plessis and Israel Adesanya. I absolutely love this fight, guys. Absolutely love it. DDP has just been doubted every step of the way since he's been in the UFC. Now he's finally getting the respect he deserves. Does his awkward style and reckless movements get the better of Izzy? Or does Izzy, the more technical striker, figure out how to deal with that awkward style and all the movements? Izzy's coming into this fight with a lot of time off, especially considering how active he was before this little break he's had. I actually think the time off is going to do him well, because you got to think, being that active, guys, like, of course you're going to have some nagging injuries. It's just what it is. Like, these guys are human, you know, it's soft tissue and stuff just gets hurt. And I think the time off, giving his body a time to rest, recover, I think we're in for a treat on Saturday night. And I think Izzy's going to be very motivated because he knows he's fighting for his legacy right here. Will this be the end of prime Izzy, or will we see vintage Stylebender on Saturday night? How will these guys adapt in the fight round by round? Because I think this fight is going to be about adjustments. It's going to be tough on DDP trying to figure out how to get to Izzy with all the movement, the stance switches, the feints. And then on the flip side, it's going to be tough for Izzy trying to figure out the awkward movements of DDP, just his tempo, his movements, his stance switches as well. And then you got to throw in the grappling as well. These two guys have trained together years ago, and they have felt each other in the grappling sequence, and they both admitted that DDP got the better of Israel in the grappling exchanges when they trained together all those years ago. So there you have it, guys. There are my top 3 fights for UFC 305. Let me know what you guys think. Let me know if this video was a W or an L. Like, subscribe, and until next time.